Afternoon, good evening to all of you. My name is Rhonda Grove Zachary, and I am the founder and CEO of education.org. With Egyptian roots and ties to Switzerland and the US, I often find myself wondering, how can we enable knowledge and progress to flow much more freely across continents? This is part of why today is so important, because it's about breaking those barriers and honoring the incredible work that's already happening on the ground, and sparking the energy we need to ensure that we can accelerate change together. This session is very special. You can hear that I lost my voice last week and it was fine until this moment, so just a moment. This session is very important to us because it honors the tireless work happening on the ground. It's not just who is here today and who our wonderful panelists are. It honors what's happening in classrooms, in communities, and in ministries that bring us to this moment. The research, the innovation, the persistence of governments, the educators and partners have laid the foundation for what we will share today. And yet, really important, today is not just a webinar. We hope that it is a spark. We already have the evidence as an education sector. We've seen progress together, and what we need now is formidable energy to close the gap between knowing and doing, so that every child not only reaches school or an alternative path, but thrives there. And just to put this in context, today there are around 400 to 500 folks signed up for this session. I know people are still joining as we're speaking. From leaders in government to implementers, funders, researchers. If each of us were to carry what we learned today to 3 others, just 3, and they do the same, that's over 5,000 people reached. And assuming that each of them influences at least the lives of 50 children, together we can change, just from being here today, the lives of 250,000 children and young people, all from the energy we unleash today. That is the power of this room, and that is the reason I'm very honored to open this session. I'd like to thank, before we dive in deeply, thank you to our UNICEF colleagues for partnering with us on this event. We are delighted to be joined by Dr. Pia Brito, UNICEF's Global Director of Education and Adolescent Development, who will be moderating today's panel. That panel will feature Mr. Haroon Youssef, CEO of Kenya's National Commission for Nomadic Education, Dr. Mary Pagosi, Executive Director of Educate a Child, Martha Hewison, Coordinator of INEE's, the International Network for Education in Emergencies Accelerated Education Working Group, and Hendrina Daroba, Division Manager of Education, Human Capital, and Employment of the African Development Bank. Their bios will also be shown in the chat function later in the session today. So we are delighted to jump into the session, but before I do that, I want to say it's not just the panelists we honor and who are wonderful and esteemed. The true heroes of this session are the implementers whose evidence has been crystallized and distilled in the work we show today. The hundreds, if not thousands, of contributors who are working on the ground for the purpose of helping out-of-school children to access school and to stay in school and thrive. Okay, before we dive in, a couple of quick housekeeping functions. If you need the caption function, including for translation, please click the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen. Also note, we will capture all the comments and the session is being recorded, but besides the dedicated Q&A session that will happen a little later, we will not be able to provide immediate responses to the chats, but our teams will be reviewing what comes in, and we will do our best to reply either through media or through our website. If you have a persistent question, please feel free to reach out directly to us and we'll provide that info at the end of the session. I also want to give a short update. I'm afraid that Minister Senge had to pull out of the event because of a very urgent short notice emergency that puts him on a plane. So he's physically unable to join this event, but he wanted to share his support for the work that we are doing and share with the audience his commitment to this mission and the progress that's happening. He wants to make sure continues as a long-term partner of ours. But I also want to share that we're honored to have Mr. Haroon Youssef, CEO of Kenya's National Commission for Nomadic Education, who will provide opening remarks in his place. And I'm delighted to have him join, let me first thank both of them. We always know when we have a chief minister, there's a risk that something will pull them away. That's just part of the normal daily life. We are delighted to have Haroon Youssef, first because of his flexibility for stepping in, but also because he has been one of our longest partners with the Kenya Nomadic, the Council for Nomadic Education. I'm sorry, is someone else coming off mute? I just heard some. Okay, I'll continue and then we'll switch over to Mr. Haroon. So I wanted to introduce him and thank him for being one of the most tireless champions I've ever met for dealing with children's challenges who are in the most arid, most impoverished regions in Kenya, and who has really also taken on his shoulders a lot of innovative approaches. So I want to thank him for stepping in, and I will turn it over to him, and then we will come to some of the introductions around the STEP framework and then introduce our panel. Pia Brito will be coming in shortly as well. So for the moment, I will turn it over to Haroon Youssef. You will see his biography in the chat. And I will just turn it over to you, Mr. Haroon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Randa Zakari, for the invite and giving me the opportunity to make the opening remarks. Despite the short notice, I'm very willing to step in and support this particular program. Foremost, I would like to thank you once again, and also thank Dr. Mary Joy Rosie of Educate the Child and the organizers of this event, UNICEF, for having worked together in out-of-school children program, Operation Bring Back 250,000 children back to school program, which has just ended. And I'm really grateful that we have done a number of other programs for out-of-school children in Kenya, and still the focus is still remaining to work together on the same. Maybe to come back to the event of today, I'm happy to mention that I'm aware that a huge number of children are out of school globally. Estimates indicate about 272 million children and youth remain out of school, with sub-Saharan Africa accounting for the largest share. The reality is that progress in access has been uneven, and unless we act collectively, the dream of education for all will remain elusive. In Africa, nomadic populations, conflict-affected regions, and non-uniform settlements concentrate the majority of out-of-school children, constitute the majority of out-of-school children. Kenya reflects this picture. Despite significant progress and heavy investment in education, the latest national estimates suggest over 2 million school-age children 6 to 13 years are out of school, with nomadic and marginalized regions, urban informal settlements, and pockets of poverty accounting for more than 80%. The picture may in fact be worse. Our data is based on a pre-COVID survey, and we suspect that the numbers may have doubled due to post-pandemic disruptions. Qualities on the Ministry of Education, through the National Commission for Nomadic Education in Kenya, are preparing a new national study to generate accurate data on the prevalence, causes, and implications of school children. We are inviting our partners to support this particular effort, and I'm happy to mention that UNICEF is already in support of this particular program as we work on the same. In order to address these particular challenges, Kenya has put up a number of strategic approaches to make sure that this is dealt with. And I'm only just going to mention, and without going deep into it, because we have the panel to deal with. We have policy and systemic anchors that the National Strategic and Education Sector Plan 2027 prioritized the enrollment of out-of-school children through targeted efforts, interventions including expansion of low-school boarding schools to accommodate enrolled learners, multi-partner programs with clear targets, evidence-based approaches, climate-smart cross-sectoral innovations, and many other efforts, including and developing developing the accelerated learning programs, which have been assented to by the education leadership, including the PS and the minister, are actually in place. Thank you very much. This now consists my brief remarks. I'll be now willing to participate in the panel. Thank you, Dr. Dr. Randa, for support.
Thank you so much, Mr. Haroon. I will now share my screen. Just a moment here. It's not getting out the. Okay. I trust the organizers will tell me if there's anything funny, but you should now see the first page of our walk into STEP. So what I'm happy to do now is introduce for you STEP, Successful Transitions Through Evidence-Based Planning and Insights on Getting 272 Million Out-of-School Children and Youth into the Classroom and Setting Them Up for Success. So first, I'd like to introduce education.org very briefly. And let me just share today's session, before we move into the panel, what we wanted to do was simply introduce the community here to the STEP framework, the reason for it, and the highlights of what it is. But of course, there's so much more that's available online. So we're only going to go through some of the headlines. Before we do that, let me just share, because education.org is still relatively young and new, that wanted to take a minute to introduce who we are. At a time when nearly 300 million children are out of school and many more are in school but not learning, we believe it's not a lack of evidence, but a lack of using it that keeps us from moving faster together. And that's why we focus on closing the last mile between knowing and doing so every child can learn. What that means is that we put the best high-quality evidence, the most relevant evidence, peer-reviewed and practice-based, into the hands of governments in an actionable way. This helps leaders move further and faster towards their own national goals through stronger decisions and smarter investments. And just for example, you'll hear in a few minutes about our work that has distilled 11,000 sources. 11,000, and that's right. That's probably not surprising to everyone, because we know there are so many implementing organizations whose work rarely sees the light of day. And in some cases, this work is so amazing and needs faster uptake and spread. This is so critical to our mission, and our focus on leadership is deliberate. Why? Because around the world, there's a strong emphasis on evidence-based programming, and that's important. But there's much less emphasis on evidence-based leadership, the tools, the culture, and infrastructure that make evidence at a leadership level routine and systematic. And that's the gap we're here to fill. And here's the difference. If we want to help a child, let's support a program. But if we want to help every child, let's strengthen the system. By working with system leadership, every decision ripples through, or at least has the potential to ripple through and touch every teacher, every classroom, and every learner in the country. Our leadership guidance draws on a global evidence base, and we complement it by working side by side with government partners. Some are here today. We work with them to embed uptake and strengthen evidence architecture for the long term, and we're delighted to have some of our partners join us today. Why are we focusing on transitions, and why now? So I think most of the folks who are joining us today are very much aware of the number of out-of-school children and the situation that it's growing for many different reasons. And millions are returning to learning through non-formal or accelerated education, but too few make it back to school. Now, a few years ago, we did a very comprehensive synthesis on accelerated education programs, which provides concentrated form of foundational learning in a short time frame in order to help children be prepared for a transition. And it uncovered a significant gap that we learned from our ministerial partners. That transition step is very much undercovered, understudied, under-resourced, and also with very little accountability, or let's say varying accountability between non-formal and formal systems. So I just want to share before we move forward, there's a very timely moment in the context of reduced aid, increased conflict, increased out-of-school children. How can we ensure successful transitions from non-formal education to school? This is the main focus of the work today. And before I move on, I also want to share that, of course, the transition to school does not suit every child. Some children will never be seeing the school environment. They will be seeing other pathways that take them to training or to work. And we recognize that. The focus of this synthesis is school because of the amount of evidence and the scoping of the, let's just say, technical reasons that the scoping allowed enough evidence to be seen from this particular topic. There's much less evidence on training and work, but we see significant applicability of the lessons we'll share today, regardless of the pathway that's taken in the future. And I'll be diving into that just a little later. So if we move on, one of the things we learned is, okay, we all understand there's a challenge here, but there's a very significant gap in the data. What gets measured gets treasured. And yet when it comes to transitions, measurement is almost absent. So just very briefly on this picture, you will see only, let's say, less than 1/5 of all education programs, accelerated education, have longitudinal tracking data. Of those that do have tracking data, the rate of transitions vary from 3 to 90%. And even more shocking is that when we look at education sector plans, for those who might not be deeply involved in the sector, the national education strategies, just a little more than 10% make any mention of transitions after these programs. So our question was, how is it that these programs, which have great talent invested and money, how do they ensure that children and young people really successfully make it to the next step, whatever it is, school, training, or work, if we're not tracking it, if we're not measuring it? So our point here is that was the first step in understanding the current situation. If we do not measure it, we will not be able to address, closing the gap. Sorry, I'm taking a sip. This gap will not close itself, even if it has a handful of actors with a very good will. If we're serious about foundational learning, especially for the hardest to reach children, this is a critical gap that requires collective action. Without tracking and planning, it risks that AEPs become a dead end instead of bridging that they were intended to be. So if we don't track it, we can't fix it, and this gap will not close on its own. Okay, so if this data gap is so wide, the obvious question is, what does this mean for learners themselves? Let's look what actually happens in practice. Based on the evidence we gathered, we see that less than half of all learners in accelerated education will transition successfully to school, and not just enroll, but participate. And in fragile and crisis contexts, you can imagine this is lower. It drops to 4 in 10. But also, transition alone is not enough to be successful. Of course, we expect to have children being retained in the environment and really thriving in terms of good learning outcomes, strong learning outcomes. The point is today, amid increasingly constrained resources, it's more important than ever to make sure that programs are set up for success. The whole point of accelerated education is to prepare children and young people for the next step. And that means we must invest in having the right policy scaffolding around them to support. Before I jump into the methodology behind it, just to substantiate the credibility of what I'm about to show you, I want to emphasize the reason that this work was taken on was not only the aid environment, reduced aid, increased out-of-school children. I want to emphasize that this work was primarily driven because we were hearing ministerial leaders tell us this was a big gap, that during COVID, the number of private providers of non-formal education, including accelerated education programs, had expanded, if not exploded. And that was wonderful, but they were working to find ways to increase standards and to unify expectations. That is happening slowly. It's happening gradually. But what continued to be a gap was what happens after the program is done. And that is why this work became so critical. So with that in mind, our team set forth to find the most relevant high-quality evidence around the world. And this is a hallmark of the approach we bring. Usually in such a webinar, we would not go into details about methods. I just want to spend a second on this, few seconds, if you'll allow, because it explains why you can trust this work and why it brings credibility to this challenge that's been longstanding. The main point I want to share here is that the work we've done shows transition challenges are specific, they are specific to stages of transition, they are predictable, and they are preventable. And I have a feeling many of the implementers in the audience here or who are not joining us today will say, of course they are. But this is not something we've seen that has been lifted and acted on from policymakers and program developers in a consistent way. So I just want to share with you what's behind what I'm about to show, the STEP framework that we're introducing today, is what's on the right. So we have developed an approach called LIFTED, a locally inclusive framework for transforming education decision-making. And that framework is based on hunting down and assessing the most relevant information, whether it's peer-reviewed in a journal or whether it's from field insights and practitioner experience. We find it, we classify it, we appraise it, and we distill it. And we do this by working primarily with networks and partners around the world. And I want to thank many of you who are on the line who've been part of contributing to that. Without you, this work would not have emerged in the way it has. 11,000 sources screened, 11,000, nearly 400 appraised. And this is behind the work we see today. Of course, that means that we see more work from countries whose evidence would otherwise not be seen, actually almost 40 countries. We have more languages, more themes, etc. And that is what was behind the credibility of the work. This is the essence of the STEP framework we're showing today, and this is the main last point I will make. The STEP framework is a result of what I've just shown you. The STEP framework has the major point of saying, in previous days, transitions were usually seen as one big leap. If we look deeply at the evidence we've assessed, we see what really happens is a 5-step process across a learner's journey. I will not go into the steps here now, but you can see from this graphic, and it's all in the work online at education.org. It is starting with not finishing the AEP program, but in the AEP program itself. And it goes through steps and ends with actually finishing the next step, not just getting into it. And at each step, there are predictable risks, there are mitigations, and there are rich examples, policy and program examples, that can show how those risks can be overcome and successfully achieved. I just wanted to put this up to show you the basis of the STEP framework, supporting transitions through evidence-based planning. And the point is that this is meant to be a tool with governments, implementers, and donors. I also want to point out that more than 70 organizations across 50 countries have been part of validating the shaping of this framework. And I just want to invite you as the audience to also continue to help us adapt this, because everything we put out is living and adaptable, because we know that research is not static. So transition is not one step, it's 5 steps. And with collective input, we can make each step succeed. Accompanying this work, we've collected a series of examples, and I will not go into these now. I'm putting this up there for your reading, but just to share with you, in the actual documents and in our work with our team, there's a toolkit that accompanies this set. You will see a very rich set of examples with links and sources for policies and programs that support each step of the process. And we'll hear some of that today in the panel discussion shortly. This is to remind that there's not just a conceptual insights document on the output of the evidence that we've gathered, but actually a very pragmatic toolkit that's been created about how to use this. And there are 2 parts to it. There's a questionnaire to help policymakers and implementers do their situation assessment in their own context and identify their priorities. And then there is a menu of strategies tailored to what the output of the questionnaire is, with direct links to sources that can help. In summary, I want to get to the panel as soon as we can. I want to thank, of course, the team that's helped put this together and our supporters. In particular, I want to share thanks with Dr. Sophia D'Angelo, who's our Director of Research and was the primary driver behind this massive amount of work, 11,000 sources, remember, that I told you about. She didn't do it alone, but she had a huge part in driving the effort. I also want to thank Georgina for organizing the session today and everything behind it, and Kilemi Mawiria, Dr. Kilemi Mawiria, former assistant minister in Kenya, who's had a very strong role in helping the consultations to happen in shaping this work and developing the framework. With that, I'll close by just saying, we really believe today is just a spark. A webinar is just a webinar. We don't want to rely on today's webinar as a point of impact, but we're delighted for everyone to be joining. We hope it is a spark for increased collective attention to transitions, making more of what we're all doing for this issue anyway, but possibly using what we've learned to make sure fewer children fall through the cracks and really do thrive. With that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to introduce Pia Britta. Pia, thank you for joining us. Pia is the Global Director of Education at UNICEF. I will put my video back on. I'm delighted to have her join. She will be moderating the rest of the session. She has been a long-standing friend and colleague, especially for reaching the hardest to reach children. And I want to, I'm sorry, I'm seeing Haroon's face on the screen, but I'm assuming that Pia's ready. I just don't see her. Yeah. May I turn it over to you, Pia? Yes, great. Nice to see you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Rhonda. And congratulations. What a powerful, compelling set of work. The framework is tremendous. And I think your words resonate with us that this is not a leap. It's a series of 5 steps to make the transition. And I think this is so well taken based on the robust body of evidence. Tremendous work, because we have to tackle this challenge of out-of-school children. We're calling this learning denied, and we have to take this on head on. So we will now take this amazing framework. Everyone who's here on the webinar, we have over 250 guests with us. We're going to take this amazing framework and we're going to deconstruct it in 3 themes, because we need to see now how this can be implemented. We're going to talk about finance and governance, teaching and learning, and the data element that Rhonda, you brought out with the governance element to it. We have an amazing set of panelists to help us unpack this and understand what it means for implementation. While you listen to the panel, and of course also on the framework, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat box, and we're going to try to take some of them for sure. Let's see how time permits. So now I'm going to turn to our panel and really ask you to take this big number with the framework and share with us, what does this mean when we take it forward? I'm also hoping we can have an engagement between panel members, because we have such amazing minds with us. So not only will I ask the questions, but also amongst the panel members, and they have been all introduced. You have their bios, so I'm sure you're equally excited as I am for this conversation. Please feel free to open your video, so we can get started. Wonderful. So let's start with the finance one, because I think this is an area that we all know, even the most effective recommendations really understand the need. We have to have finance in place. This is often the barrier to inclusion when resources are scarce. So maybe if you would allow, I would like to start with Mr. Haroon Yusuf, please, with the first question, given your very, very inspiring opening remarks. Now, many countries report that financing large-scale inclusion programs is hampered by upfront costs, right? This is what we do upfront to make a decision, and that often departments make siloed decisions that don't really help us with efficiency. Given your experience, what mechanisms have proven to be most effective in aligning budgets and responsibilities? So really looking at the governance of finance. And in that governance of finance, how can we use this to improve the efficiency of investments? Rhonda has talked about money is getting scarcer and scarcer. So over to you. So ideas on governance of finance, for efficiency of investment for out-of-school learners? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pia Rebelo of UNICEF. Foremost, I would like to thank UNICEF once again. As I said earlier, we have a very strong partnership between the government of Kenya and the UNICEF, and education about and educate a child of Qatar in ensuring that the out-of-school children program is dealt with in a very, very strategic and big way. As you mentioned, certainly the element of finance has always been a challenge. But what I would like to emphasize very clearly is that out-of-school children is a serious crisis for everybody, for every government, Kenya included. And as we mentioned today, we have about 2 million children out of school in Kenya, despite the heavy investment the government of Kenya has done to ensure that these children are brought to school. But we have still this number out of school because of many other factors other than finance. Why this is very important is the fact that that out-of-school children is out-of-school child is a lost opportunity for everybody. It is possibly a doctor that never trained, a teacher that never mobilized, an entrepreneur that never unleashed. So it's really painful for any country, globally, including Kenya, to have an out-of-school child. So in Kenya, we established the National Commission for Nomadic Education to specifically deal with the problem of out-of-school children. The idea was that Kenya as a government has invested heavily in the programs in education. I think it is the leading country in sub-Saharan Africa, which has 30% of the budget for education. But and that access on the average in Kenya to education is almost 100%. But now when you look at the entire country, because the average is very good, but when you look at deep inside and the country is clustered into counties, you will find that certain counties in Kenya are below the transition rates. I mean, are very below in terms of access. They are less than 30%. This includes about 8 counties in the arid counties alone constitute for the highest number of school children, and they also show indications of very low enrollments to access to education in Kenya. So the commission was established in order to address the context-specific challenges bedeviling the delivery of education in Kenya, in order to deal with, because the country, as big as it is, has one equal formula for supporting education in the country. Even its teachers, they're deployed in a certain way, equally for all the countries. Even resources, teachers are deployed in a certain way, in an equal way. But you'll still find that quite a number of counties in the ASALs who have got very hard areas to reach, who are unable to access education as equal as the rest of the country. And what is causing this has actually been established in a number of studies, including the impact of climate change that actually brought about poverty as a major factor affecting the hidden cost of education, lack of water, lack of food, a number of factors. So the council was established, and that's why the leadership was actually focused in establishing the council, and the focus being on the pastoralist, the urban settlements, and the other hard to reach areas of Kenya. Innovation evidence has also been a strategy for ensuring that budgets are aligned and to ensure that little money available is also coupled with innovation. Kenya has pioneered flexible learning approaches for mobile schools to boarding facilities and resident education programs. You realize that the government has allocated pockets of money to different approaches. It has allocated money to boarding schools, which may not be enough as required. It has allocated money to and mobile schools in areas that have got high number of mobile communities that are moving triggered by the environment. And finally, Kenya, in partnership with Education.org, has sharpened the national strategy for out-of-school children and supported development of a national guidelines for accelerated education. Now moving into implementation, these guidelines are a direct result of the comprehensive evidence synthesis we heard about earlier, showing how global knowledge can be translated into a national action. So the accelerated learning program has also been put as a clear strategy for linking out-of-school children back to school. Partnership with Education.gov and UNICEF show the power of grounding reforms in rigorous practices-based evidences. Sierra Leone's accelerated learning program guidelines offer one example. In Kenya, we are applying similar lessons as we strengthen our own frameworks for nomadic and marginalized learners. In order to deal with possibly the missing links, accelerated and non-formal programs are a lifeline. But too often, the bridge to formal school is broken. The major step is successful transition through evidence-based planning addresses this gap. Only half of learners transition in fragile contexts, just 40%. These risks are predictable and preventable. Financing and political will, Kenya invests strongly in education, including marginalized learners, but global funding cuts put millions at risk. 6 in 10 accelerated programs face closure. Resources must be guided by high-quality frontline evidences. A very good example of this is the closure of USAID, where a huge program that was running in Kenya has actually now come to a halt.
Yes,
And which has actually come back to a halt.
that's right.
So partnership and global solidarity. Step shows how roles come together.
Right.
Education.org brings evidence, government, anchor implementation, use of partners, and scale solutions. A call to action: no child should complete an accelerated program only to be left stranded. Transitions must be built into every plan, every budget, and every pledge. When we place out of school and at-risk children first, we strengthen education systems for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really impressive to hear the experience, the leadership from Kenya, starting with the budget allocation. And the idea of the commission is a very impressive one for the governance towards delivery. And I really liked how the budget alignment and the guidelines came together. Thank you so much for sharing that. Very, very informative. With that wonderful experience, may I turn to Hendrina Doroba. Hendrina, we're looking forward to hearing from your unique perspective on the governance. And I would like to shift gears a bit here and want to ask you, in many countries, non-formal programs are funded and implemented by NGOs or donors, and we're sort of hearing about this changing in funding patterns, and formal schools are led by governments. So while AEPs are often seen as cost-effective, there are also concerns about AEPs creating a competition between formal and non-formal systems. So what would you say are the governance and finance strategies to bring these systems closer together so they complement each other and serve a distinct purpose so all people benefit? And also, I'm very sorry, we're starting to run out of time, which is the worst place to be when we're so excited about a conversation. Is it possible to receive your answer in about 4 minutes or so?
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. Again, very good question. I'll try as much as possible to do this in 4 minutes, for sure. Let me start by just acknowledging and just appreciating the organizers of this event for giving the opportunity to the Africa Development Bank to be part of this conversation. And I'm saying this because as the African Development Bank, we are really concerned about the out-of-school children. I mean, we do acknowledge that out of the numbers that have been highlighted, 60% of those youth are in sub-Saharan Africa, and most of them are between the age of 16 and 18. And this is why, from the African development perspective, if you look at our 10-year strategy, there's a lot of emphasis on making sure that the youth are at the center of whatever development support that we provide to government. So yes, it's an issue. We need to be working together, and we need to do this in a more seemingly manner. Now, secondly, I want to say that there should be no room for competition. We need to put the child, that youth, at the center. If we are going to compete, let's compete on how we can complement each other. I think we don't have the time for the government or stakeholders, other stakeholders, to be working in parallel. We've heard from the report that there's a lot that is going on. Most of them are actually very good initiatives. But then we need to look beyond that and see, first of all, who has the responsibility in terms of policy, who has the expertise and innovation, and how do we bring that together so that we are able to address the issues that child is missing out of school. We need to acknowledge that education is a right to every child. Even those that are out of school, they have the right to have education. So we have no room for competition. Now, coming to your question in terms of, what strategies do we need to put together from the governance perspective? From where I sit and from where I stand, I think there are a number of things that we need to be looking at. Some of the issues have been highlighted in the report. But for me, I think the issue of policy alignment and strategy is critical. We need to find a way that the AEPs are not seen to be, implementing parallel program from what the government is supposed to be implementing. We need to acknowledge the government has that responsibility to make sure that they have the right policies in place, and we should be working to complement the civil society or other stakeholders should be working to complement what the government agenda is. And so working together will be critical. The second point is about multi-stakeholder governance structures. The government does put in place a steering committee, and I think we need to see more engagement in that area where we bring in different stakeholders to actually push the agenda, to set the agenda, but also push its implementation. What we are seeing now of parallel implementation is not helping. I think we need to come together. We need to be part of those sub or national platforms where we can actually engage and putting that child at the center, because that is the reason why we are working in this space. The other one, in doing so, we'll be able then to clearly define the different roles that each actor is supposed to be playing. For instance, the government could be responsible for making sure there's a policy in place, there are standards in terms of certification, there are standards in terms of the kind of exams that are supposed to be done, so that the transition to formal education should not be a problem. And the children who are going through the accelerated learning should not be disadvantaged just because they are going through that process. So I think for me, that harmonization is important and we need to work together. Of course, there was an issue of data monitoring systems and so on. I do recall in the presentation earlier that there are issues of getting the right information or to be able to get that data concerning the out-of-school children. Indeed, if we don't get the right data, we'll not be able to plan, we'll not be able to allocate resources. So we need to actually harmonize the monitoring mechanism or the reporting mechanism or frameworks that we are going to be put in place. Sometimes it's saddening to see non-government actors have their own monitoring mechanism. The government has its own monitoring mechanism. At the end of the day, there's this child at the center. Can we not bring all those together so that when we have a shared understanding of what we want to monitor and we jointly monitor the progress that we are making? And then, of course, the issue of capacity and knowledge. We need to acknowledge that some of the non-state actors have the innovation, have very good systems of bringing in out-of-school children into the system. But then how do we bring that together so that we integrate in what the government is doing for purposes of, innovation, but also flexibility, and just making sure that we provide a sustainable mechanism of addressing the issues of out of school. Now, when it comes to financing, I know my 2 minutes may be up, is a couple of things. A couple of things that I would like to emphasize. One is, of course, we need to find a mechanism of food funding. There are a lot of resources that are coming in from different angles, but can we find a framework where we put all those resources together, we are accountable, and we are able to show results that we are getting out of those financing? Number two, we could also explore the result-based financing, where we say, for any civil society that is going to be involved, if you deliver this, you get this amount of money, you deliver that, that way will be accountable. The issue of public-private partnership is also something that we can look at, in making sure that we bring in different actors and leverage on the resources, even from the private sector, to be part of the system. And I know that in such a case, the government has a responsibility to make sure that they put a policy in place that accommodates public-private partnership. So there's a lot that we can talk about that, cost-sharing models and so on, building synergy. But I want to end by just saying, there's a human being at the center of all this. Yeah. We as actors in this space, we need to collaborate, we need to share data, we need to share finances, we need to share innovation, ideas, and everything. At the end of the day, every child has a right to education. So let's work together to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hendrina. What a clear, compelling statement, and really impressive to hear about the 10-year strategy of the Africa Development Bank with youth at the center. I think you're clear, no competition, no room for it, but not compete, but let's complement. And I really loved your definition and framework for complementarity by defining roles, sharing information, the harmonization. I mean, you laid out very, very clear ways. And thanks for the 2 recommendations as well on pooled funding and results-based financing. This was very, very clear. And we could hear the passion in this statement. Thank you so much. I know we could speak much more on this topic, but we have another big theme we want to pick up. And this is where we want to talk about the teaching and the learning. And we know that success really depends on that. So I'm so happy we have with us Martha Hewison to really speak with us about how do these fit-for-purpose learning pathways, which we know are being cited as essential for bringing out of school children back in the classroom. How do we take this forward? Because many systems are struggling, right, with teacher preparedness, curriculum adaptation. So if we want to provide this quality learning environment, what are some examples of how teacher capacity has been built or leveraged? And how do we deliver this accelerated learning? And if you have a couple of, in this short time we have remaining, if you'd like to speak about any specific policy or programmatic steps, over to you, Martha. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So I think, as you mentioned, that teacher preparedness and curriculum adaptation are absolutely critical for learners' success. And of course, they have a huge impact on transition. And there are so many challenges with teacher preparedness when it comes to, I think, non-formal education more broadly, and specifically accelerated education. I think when we look at non-formal education teachers, accelerated education teachers, they are often not qualified, and they're often identified by communities. They are therefore not part of any government system, government payroll, and they often miss out or don't have the opportunity for teacher professional development. And teachers are not trained specifically on how to teach a condensed curriculum, if a condensed curriculum exists. And in addition, I think teachers really lack the specific training that equips them to teach learners who have been out of school for significant periods of time. Really importantly, learners who are often over age, and teachers mostly use the same content pedagogy as they do with the primary school learners. So the pedagogy and the content used in the accelerated education classroom really needs to be adapted to older learners, and teachers need to build on the rich set of experiences and skills that older learners also bring to the classroom. So recognizing that there was definitely a gap in teacher training material, the INEE Accelerated Education Working Group has developed a specific teacher training pack for teachers working in accelerated education. And I have two examples of how teacher capacity has been built to deliver accelerated education from Somalia and Nigeria, where they've used the Accelerated Education Working Group teacher training pack, and also the steps they took to replicate this model at scale. So just very briefly, in Nigeria, where they're working towards the institutionalization of the Accelerated Basic Education Program, or ABEB, they have 4 pillars to work towards this institutionalization. And one of their pillars specifically focuses on building the capacity of teachers for the effective delivery of the ABEB curriculum. And the first step that our colleagues in Nigeria took was they had a team of experts from the National Education Research and Development Council, and in Nigeria, they are in charge of curriculum development. And they localized the Accelerated Education Working Group teacher training pack, and then they piloted it, and then they adopted the pack as the national teacher training pack for all ABEB teachers. And this is, of course, as part of a bigger package that also includes ABEB guidelines, curriculum, etc. But it really supports the institutionalization of ABEB nationally. And also in Somalia, they've also been working towards institutionalizing accelerated basic education, or ABE, and this was in large partly funded by a USAID program. And they worked on supporting the development of an ABE policy, curriculum framework, so several different policy documents, but they also again included the Accelerated Education Working Group AE Teacher Training Pack as part of this overall package. And in Somalia, they localized it and they translated the pack. And to date, they've trained 3,600 teachers using this TOT cascade model. And again, they have adopted the pack for all teachers teaching ABE in Somalia. So just to end, I think in both examples, the steps that were really critical to replicating this model at scale were this collaboration and leadership from national government institutions such as curriculum development centres or those involved in teacher training, and of course the Ministry of Education. Regular coordination and communication between the Ministries of Education and these other departments. I think that was a real key finding. The importance of localization and translation of the pack, and then piloting it. And then really importantly, of course, the last step, this adoption of the pack by the Ministry of Education for all accelerated teachers as part of a wider push to institutionalize accelerated education on a national scale. And I'm done. I hope I was
Wow.
within my... Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for such gems you just shared with us. And I love, Martha, how you took us from the framework that Rhonda shared with the 5 steps and how so clearly unpacked for us how we make this possible, really outlining the challenges, especially of the over 8 children and this pack and what it's done with these 2 country case studies. I think the 5 lessons learned on collaboration, coordination, localization, piloting, and adoption are terrific ways to take this forward. What a rich learning. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And I hope we have time to come back. I'm going to tackle the last theme, but for which we want to look at this progress out of school. And as Rhonda said to us, it's only as real as if we measure it. And that's absolutely right. And the one person I know whose lifelong passion has let's get this measurement right is Dr. Mary. Dr. Mary Pigozzi is here with us. Hi, Mary. Good to see you. I wanted to turn the data question to you because we've talked about how critical this is, and I know this is a passion you have been championing. What strategies have you employed to strengthen data collection and reporting for out-of-school learners? And I think here the one challenge we've all looked at is the low resource settings. How do we take this into the low resource settings? And I think one of the things we saw with the STEP framework is how does this then get into accountability mechanisms, actionable mechanisms going forward? So over to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Pia, and thank you to education.org and to UNICEF for putting this session together, and also for the introduction of the STEP framework, which I think is very, very, very important. And I loved a comment that Rhonda made saying, if it's not measured, it's not treasured. And I thought, that's one to really remember. Because I do think what is important about the STEP framework is it's very clear that it's not lack of evidence, but lack of action on the evidence, and perhaps lack of valuing evidence that comes from a multiple set of sources. So very specifically, in speaking about measuring, I think that what some of the strategies that we have found over our 13-year experience, perhaps 5 pretty simple ones. The first one is essentially whatever data you can get to really integrate it with the National Educational Management Information System, EMIS, because with that, then we get much less fragmentation of data and the ministry has the data on hand. The second one I would suggest is very, very important is individual learner tracking. This is something that our program absolutely requires. There's a lot of pushback on this. This is difficult to do. Why should we do this? But in fact, it's really very, very important, not only to identify the child, but to actually track that child. And this then goes back to the STEP framework, which is everything has to be measured at every step, because otherwise you're not aware really of what the journey of the child is on this learning pathway. The third area that we've realized is really important is valuing community-based collection in those areas where EMIS coverage is weak. There's a real opportunity then to bring together different ways of collecting data in order to strengthen what we know about the out-of-school children, who they are, where they are, and what they need. This then brings in also the issue of other sectors. If we can't find every child in the EMIS system or in an education system, why aren't we looking at the birth registration? Why aren't we looking at some of the local data sets? And then particularly now with the technology, the digital technologies we have, we can really bring those together to not only identify, but continue to follow these children and also understand their families, their family backgrounds. What are some of the other cross-sectoral things that come together to help us, to help those children take every step? Certainly, we've worked a lot with digital mobile solutions, such as tablets, SMS. We're beginning to work a little bit with AI. I want to give a real nod to the colleagues from Kenya and the work we have done with Nakanek and UNICEF, where we actually reached, I think, more than 250,000 children, if I remember correctly. So this particular project, along with many, many others, really experimented with how can we use information technologies and some of the emerging technologies, make them really practical for teachers, for community members to monitor and take care of what needs to be taken care of in terms of identifying children and being able to follow them. We also focus very hard on verification of data, because that too makes it important. Because if we want ministries or other planners, financiers to take our data seriously, they have to know it's real and verified. So we often use third-party verification and certainly data quality reviews on a fairly regular basis. The second part of the question you asked about translating data into action. So we've got all this great data and we've got all these ways that we can take care of data. What are we going to do now that we have the data? I think it's very obvious that targets become important, because if you don't have a target, you don't know where you're going. So you need to know what it is you want, because then you can go back and say, well, this data helps and this piece helps and this piece helps in this way. That one isn't so relevant in this piece of work. This is very important. I think a second thing is really leveraging whatever opportunities we have to collaborate with both ministries and other partners. And I think the colleague from the Africa Bank, Hendrina, I believe, raised this really important issue that it's not about competition. We're all in it together. And actually, if we begin to work together in better ways, then we're going to actually have a much better way of moving forward.
Yeah.
So I think too, we want to link the out of school data to financing decisions. One of the things we do know is if you put money on the most marginalized, the others succeed as well, others benefit. When you put money on those that are already there and already fairly advanced, those that are left behind do not benefit. There's plenty of evidence on that. So that, I think, is something for us to really take seriously. We need to then also think about how we use all these different sources of data and manage to put them into such things as national reviews,
Right.
or the education cluster, or inclusion strategies and policy, so that we begin to have a much more robust way of pulling together all the pieces for the poorest of the poor, those who've been left behind. Ultimately, we try to make results visible, because in this funding environment, but even prior to this, there was not enough attention on out-of-school children.
That's
and
right.
They're probably going to suffer more now. So I think, I know time is short and I'm trying to speed up here. I would say maybe two things. If you don't count a child, that child does not count. We really, it's not about the masses. It's about every child has the right. This kind of work is not glamorous, but it's essential if we're going to include every child and allow each and every child to fulfill her or his right to a quality education. So I stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary. I mean, we are so grateful. You've brought such expertise, knowledge to this conversation and laid it out for us so clearly. I just love the piece where identification is insufficient. We've got to track. I loved your ideas on innovation in low resource settings, bringing the community in, but where possible, looking at innovation with digital technologies. I mean, just every element of what you've brought, linking out of school data to finance, closing the loop on that. And I couldn't agree with you more. If we don't count a child, the child doesn't count. And that's unacceptable. Thank you so much. This was so, so amazing. I know we could continue this on, and unfortunately, the clock is not being kind to us and going faster than it should. So maybe if you would allow organizers just one question from the audience, which has been so engaged, and we've got hundreds of questions. If you allow one that I could open to any one panelist to respond to. There is a question here highlighting that 15% of all children are children with disabilities. Thank you, Marie, for sending that question. And how do we then allocate the budget? Is it 15% of all budgets to go to that 15% of children? How do we look at data collection around this? I'm really happy to share that question for any of the panelists who'd like to respond. I'd like to say this year, UNICEF going forward will not disaggregate data, but actually call out our accountability to getting children with disabilities in school as a priority. But the floor is open just to respond to the elements of really bringing in budget support for children with disabilities when we look at access to education. The panel is open for any panelist.
I'm happy to start just to talk about some of the ways that our partners have worked with not just identifying children with disabilities and bringing them into education, but acknowledging the very different kinds of disabilities that children face. The challenges they face are enormous. And for example, we have a program in Cambodia that has some classrooms that are dedicated to children who don't hear very well, other programs to children, other classrooms for children who don't see very well, some others who have perhaps what would be called behavioral problems, but are usually due to attention issues or other things. So I think what is really important is that it's not a one particular, for any group of children, it's not a one size fits all, but particularly for children who have disabilities. And there are many children with non-visible disabilities. And I think that's a piece we forget. I would like to just also address, again, with a very short example, working with a different partner in West Africa. We experimented with a program of itinerant teachers who were specifically trained to work in the areas of disability, but because they couldn't be in every school, they actually traveled the length and breadth of the country on a very specialized program, worked in different classrooms with regular teachers to help those teachers actually learn additional skills. So I think these are areas where we know, again, we know some of the answers. We just need to take them to scale. So those are just a couple of examples to encourage the audience to understand that those children are not totally forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, also saying to us that exclusion is not inevitable. Exclusion can be eliminated. And I think that's what you've pointed out through these examples so well. Thank you, Mary. I do want to continue this panel, but I feel like we're going to run out of time, and we are already out of time. So I want to thank our panelists so much. You've shared so generously with such richness of information. The framework, the 5 steps came to life with your answers, and we've all taken back with us very clear suggestions, ideas, and actions that we can implement going forward. So thank you so much, panelists. And with that, I turn it over to Rhonda.
Thank you, Pia, and thank you, everyone. Let me just, before we go on to the last few minutes and wrap up, I just want to come into this this point that was raised now about disability and also some of the comments. First, very appropriate and welcome comment about stairs and ramps. Thank you for the person who put that in the chat. I just want to share this. Today in this brief session, we are speaking about headlines, and that does mean we're kind of aggregating what we've learned in a big pile. But I think we all know here that doesn't work in real practice. And I just want everyone to know here, one of the critical features of our approach, and one that Dr. Sophia, I mentioned earlier, really leaned into, is seeking information, coding it, and analyzing it in a way that is really disaggregated in detail for disabilities, for gender, for many different subpopulations that need a special look in order for them to truly be served by the programs we're looking at. I don't want to take more time for that. I just want to say our work is also not just to show what evidence is there. There clearly is a need for more on disabilities, but also to highlight priorities for gaps or gaps that are priorities for further attention, including disabilities. And 15% on our estimate are children with disabilities. So I'm glad that that came up at the last point. But I do want to say what we've shared today are headlines and based on our anchor synthesis. We expect in the next few weeks to months, I don't want to promise too much too quickly, but we will be translating for different populations, gender, disabilities, also regions, also languages. So that will be coming in the future. Let me now turn to Mr. Albert Nsengiyumva. We're very grateful to have him join us. He is the executive secretary.
I'm here.
Thank you. Let me just do an introduction and turn it over to you.
Yeah, very interesting.
From UCFEED, I believe. I'm going to hand it over to you and just say thank you. You're the executive secretary for ADEA, Association for Development of Education in Africa. We've asked Mr. Albert to speak briefly about what he's heard today and how that reflects on his work, and also look towards ADEA's Triennale next month. Thank you, Albert. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Rhonda. Thank you for inviting ADEA to this webinar. Very interesting. as I've been listening, I feel like it's actually a great opportunity to start engaging even before the triennial, because the triennial, as you know, is really more in person. So I hope a number of speakers will be joining us, because this is going to be one of the key topics during the triennial. So thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. The conversations have taken place today are critical in not only bringing awareness to the challenge of out-of-school children, but in providing solutions on how we can get out-of-school children and youth back into classrooms and set them up to success. I think that's really, really important to hear from the different speakers. Africa still accounts for the world's largest number of out-of-school children. As we understand, over 100 million, with the majority concentrated in specifically in 5 countries, including Nigeria, Ethiopia, Tanzania, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Sudan. So that's really part of the UNESCO report in April 2025. Our distinguished panel today, and I really appreciate the vision that is coming up, and examples that we are learning from this, being from experts from Educate a Child, the National Commission for Nomadic Education Kenya, the Inter-Agency Network for Education and Emergency, the African Development Bank, obviously my colleague Hendrina Doroba made a very interesting points about collaboration against competition. All these have shown us that solutions exist. The evidence is clear. Learners are twice as likely to transition successfully when accelerated education programs have formal linkages with school. As the Association of Development of Education in Africa, we advocate for collecting quality data and targeting national hotspots with localized interventions and regional cooperation, moving from blanket approach to more targeted interventions, as it was well articulated in the panel. Targeted interventions are necessary because the drivers of out-of-school children will differ across different contexts. And some of these drivers include, as well explained during the panel, poverty and household barriers, which push many children into labor, conflict, fragility and displacement, gender disparities, child labor and informal work, disability and exclusion. Again, as we all see, the evidence clearly showed an estimated 9 out of 10 children with disability in Africa do not attend school. The weak early childhood development is actually create limitation for pre-primary access, less than 25% enrollment, which leads to poor school readiness, quality of education learning poverty, infrastructure and accessibility, data gaps and hidden population. I think this was also well articulated. And last but not least, the financing gaps. Many countries allocate less than 20% of their budgets to education with a high reliance on donors. But evidence without actions is meaningless. The supporting transitions through evidence-based planning framework launched today give us the blueprint for how we can support out-of-school children to transition to formal education, but it requires all of us. Again, as Entrina pointed out, we need collaboration. We need to complement each other from government, donors, implementers, and communities to work together. The foundation or the foundational must-have of collaboration between accelerated education programs, schools, and community is not just a recommendation, it is the key to transforming lives. So as we transition to the triennial, this is an event that we hope will continue this discussion, because the whole theme of the triennial is about strengthening the resilience of the Africa's educational systems, advancing towards ending learning poverty by 2035 with a well-educated and skilled workforce for the continent and beyond. So this is providing an opportunity to foster this collaboration moving forward. Addressing the challenge of out-of-school children requires a mix of evidence-based policy and adaptation of proven practices. The triennial brings together a number of stakeholders. A number of them are already represented here, from researchers, policymakers, implementing partners, funding agencies, philanthropic, and community, everyone who needs to be part of the solution. The triennial aims to encourage countries to take deliberate steps toward targeted education interventions rather than blanket approaches, emphasizing the importance of quality data to support countries in making deliberate intervention that enhance the chances of leaving no one behind. Lastly, so the triennial will comprise a number of sessions, and I would really encourage anyone who has not yet registered, will be having sessions that are more technical, that we call side events on a day one, and I hope that you will actually be engaging in one of these topics, being exactly access, equity, and inclusion. We will have breakout sessions where we'd like to bring ministers, decision makers, to share their experience and their perspective. Last but not least, we'll be also having plenary session, and one of the plenary sessions happened to be on access, equity, and inclusion. And this will provide the opportunity to discuss education matters from different perspectives with various targeted audience. Based on the presentation made today, Africa already has working practices demonstrating effective solutions. The challenge lies in scaling them, tailoring to context, and assuring sustainable financing, topics which will be captured at the triennial. Let me close this on behalf of ADEA and our partner, the Ministry of Education of Ghana, to invite you. And we look forward to welcoming you to the ADEA Triennial in Ghana from 29 to 31st October. Again, Dr. Randa, education.org, and all the key stakeholders here, UNICEF, African Development Bank, and others, let me thank you again for giving us the opportunity to be part of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Albert. Wonderful to hear from you, and we all look forward to that happening next month. Let me wrap up. We're already a few minutes over time, and being in Switzerland, that's a no-no. So let me just thank everyone for being here and everybody who contributed in any way to what we've shared today, including the audience. Again, we'll